Good morning and welcome to St Anne's Midweek message for today, the 24th of March 2021. My name's Angela Smith and I'm one of the ministry team here at St Anne's Church in Chasetown. In the ancient world, children had little value and were largely relegated to the margins of life. But it was clear from the accounts in the New Testament that Jesus welcomed, blessed and valued children. In the Gospel of Luke chapter 9 we read that Jesus took a little child and had him stand beside him. He then said to the disciples, "Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For it is the one who is least among you who is the greatest." Today, like then, children in this country and around the world, in many social settings, ethnicities and family environments, are at risk of neglect, abuse and more. During the last 12 months, some of our children have been deprived of vital schooling, of free school meals and have received in some areas replacements of questionable quality, of the companionship of family and friends, and the freedom to go outside, to go on holiday, and generally be children. Things that we have, in the past, taken for granted. We're now in the process of coming out of prolonged periods of lockdown that have hampered normal life for ourselves and our children. There was rejoicing when our schools announced that they would be reopening for all children around the UK, and most have or will shortly be returning to full-time education. However, we are understandably concerned about the long-term effects of the lockdown on our children's health, mental well-being, and how their educational achievements will fare, and what will happen in the future. But one thing that the children of this country have not had to contend with is war and its terrible consequences. I'd like to give you a snapshot of what happens in just one of these countries compared with our own, Yemen. We often only get to hear about what happens there when something particularly shocking smashes across our news. But for the children who live there, it's a daily horror. There are children who have known nothing but war in their short lives. Since 2015, the children of Yemen have been the innocent victims of this conflict. The deaths and injuries are shocking enough. 3,153 died and 5,660 injured in the last 5 years. But worse than that are the 1.8 million suffering from acute malnutrition, and 400,000 on any given day suffer a severe and acute life-threatening form of this disease, with 30,000 deaths expected every year. The few hospitals that are left standing that can treat these children are often close to the front line, and 50% of the severely malnourished children under 5 years old will never reach their full intellectual potential. Every 10 minutes, a child dies from easily preventable diseases such as measles and diphtheria. Diseases that we've all but eradicated in the West through an effective vaccination programme. These vaccinations are rarely available to the children of the Yemen. On top of this, they are also now battling COVID-19. I wonder what the parents, grandparents and carers of Yemen's children are feeling, not after 12 months of restrictions that we've been living through, but after 6 years of restrictions that have been much more brutal. How do they face on a daily basis the effect on their children's health, mental well-being, educational attainments and life choices? Our children are returning to school buildings, some of which need a great deal of work to bring them up to scratch, but nevertheless are of reasonably good quality. In Yemen, 1 in 5 schools is no longer in use, and if a school building is still standing, it often doesn't have windows and doors. The upper floors and roofs may be missing, and there are very few desks and chairs, so children sit on the floor. Sometimes school is held in a tent. For a child to have a notebook to write in is a precious commodity. Our teachers have relatively well-paid and secure jobs. The majority of teachers in Yemen haven't been paid at all for 12 months or more. Our children travel to school safely. In Yemen, they run the risk of being shot by snipers, bombed, fall victim to landmines, or maybe hit by falling masonry. But many still make that journey, as they and their families see education as a privilege and as a way of building a better future. They have the same aspirations and dreams as our children. They want to be doctors and nurses. Children want to be teachers and engineers, and footballers and scientists and journalists and musicians and filmmakers. Where is the hope for these children? I see it in the indomitable spirit of children like Ahmed, a 9-year-old blind boy I heard about recently in the news, who steps in to teach class if a children doesn't come into school on any given day. He teaches others what he's already learned himself. He teaches them the Quran, some science, and some maths. When asked what he wants, he asks for a new school, a place with a roof and windows and doors, so they don't get wet when it rains. When he was asked what he wants for himself, he said he'd like a bike, because after school his friends play out on theirs, but he can't go with them because he doesn't have one. I'm not sure how successful he would be riding a bike, given the fact that he can't see, but I do admire his spirit, his courage and his tenacity. It's not surprising that his ambition is to be a teacher. And where do we stand in all of this? The rich countries of the West, the countries that have been supposedly built on Christian principles. Well, we sell arms to the countries and factions that take part in these wars. And then we give financial aid to help the people on the receiving end, so that they have medical supplies and food, if we can get it past the blockades. And this is after they've been shot and bombed by the armaments that we've sold. Is it just me, or does that seem totally ludicrous? What kind of madness is it that gives aid with one hand to save lives and livelihoods, and takes those lives and livelihoods away with the other? And this year our government is looking to cut the amount of financial aid we give, from 0.7% to 0.5% of GDP, which means that an additional 100,000 children could starve to death in Yemen alone. Now don't get me wrong, this country will still be one of the most generous when it comes to giving foreign aid. But other countries take a note of what we're doing. What sort of example will we be setting? And what on earth must God be making of all this? As far as the ordinary people of this country are concerned, well, I am so very proud of how generously we give as individuals to those in need. Look at the fabulous causes that have been supported during the last 12 months through local and national fundraising. The millions of pounds raised that show just how much we love our neighbours, whether at home or abroad. And the amount of volunteers' time given, willingly, to make someone else's life better and just a little bit happier. We're coming to Easter, When Mary, Jesus' mother, watched as her son sacrificed himself for the love of this world and its people, what would she think now of that sacrifice, when over 2,000 years later we still haven't learned the lessons of love, justice and compassion for all people, and especially for children, that Jesus came to teach us? How can we expect the children of the future in places like Yemen to build the kind of world that Jesus longed for and died for, when through our actions we teach them that the price of a gun is worth more than their lives? Surely we have an opportunity in this global Britain that our government is now banging on about to make a real difference to the lives of children around the world. If you want to know how we can play a part in making this difference, and I don't mean by giving money, because I know that we already give as much as we can to causes that are close to our hearts, could I urge you to look at websites like Save the Children, UNESCO and Tear Fund. There you'll find information about children around the world who are suffering, and the initiatives that we can be involved with if we can spare some time. And if our hearts have been touched by what we've read and what we've heard this morning, please don't forget the power of prayer for these situations. Thank you. God bless.